I'm Ben Olson. I grew up in Jacksonport a long time ago. Went to Sevastopol, kindergarten through graduation, and I remember the Bookmobile very fondly. That brown box on wheels pulling up in front of Sevastopol and opening its doors, and kids would go out, and we'd wait in a line and queue up for it and go in, and there were all those shelves full of books that we could check out, and there was a very distinct smell in that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I just remember that there was a smell. Not unpleasant, but there was a smell in that Bookmobile. So when this came along and I saw what was happening, I was looking for something to do at the time to volunteer somewhere, and so it was a natural for me. Little bit about tonight. I am going to focus on schools that were only in operation during the years of the Bookmobile, so the 50s to the 80s. So there are some schools that maybe came along later. There's some older schools. They're not going to be part of this. The other thing is that Sturgeon Bay Public Schools did not participate in the Bookmobile program. And Giz and I were talking about this last week, and just sort of a why, and I don't think we have a definitive answer, but if you think back to Sturgeon Bay High School, it was right across the street from the original library, so there probably wasn't a need there. And so I didn't have to deal with the Sturgeon Bay schools, so they're not part of this tonight, in case you were looking for that. But there is obviously Southern Door. There were some Sturgeon Bay schools outside of the regular Sturgeon Bay school system, and I'm going to go through Central, Northern, Washington Island, and try to wrap it all up in a decent amount of time. One of the other things too, when I first started talking to Giz about this, was I found out that there is not one photo that exists of the Bookmobile in front of a school. So that made it a little more challenging, but through the magic of artificial intelligence, I have had some illustrations put together that, or I did them, pressed the button, and there out they came. So to give you an idea of how it might have looked when the Bookmobile was in action with these schools. I want to provide give some thanks tonight. Fortunately, a couple people are here too. Nyla Small, first of all, who's here, who is the definitive expert on the rural schools of Door County. She was extremely generous with me with sharing her photos, with sharing information, and absolutely could not have done this without her. From Southern Door, we had Judy Jesse, who also was extremely generous. She's the expert at Southern Door Historical Society. Ginny Hain is here tonight. I got to meet her for the first time, and I know some of Nyla's content for the central part of Door County came from Ginny, so indirectly got it from her. So thank you very much for that help. A couple of other people, Laura at the Door County Library was very helpful, and a lot of the content came from the Door County Advocate online archive. And I will tell you, if you like history and you haven't visited it online, it is an amazing resource. It goes from the 1800s all the way through 1979, and everything is there, and you just access it through the Sturgeon Bay Library website and click through, and you can search just about anything. And it was really, really helpful. Also, if you're on Facebook and you're not a member of DC History Geeks, it is a really, really good resource as well, and very interesting. I also tapped a lot of the historical societies in the county, along with a few other sources. So thanks to all of those. You know, I love this statement, and it really is. The Bookmobile didn't just bring stories, it brought the world to our doorstep. And if you had a chance to take a look at the map that was over here, I've got it on the screen, but this really shows where the schools were located in the county and where the libraries were. And you can see in certain areas, like where we are now, there was a good representation with libraries. And obviously Sturgeon Bay and Washington Island had theirs, but there's big swatches of the county where there aren't actually public libraries, Southern Door and the Central Door. And the Bookmobile really served that purpose. It brought learning, it brought the books to the students instead of them having to make their way, in some cases, a pretty good distance to the libraries that we had. If you were looking for where the Bookmobile was going to be, you went to the Door County Advocate, and there was a column every week called Library Notes. Could have been called Bookmobile schedule, because that's pretty much what it was. But it would show you where the Bookmobile was going to be that week with the different schools. And this is just a representation that I pulled from 53 all the way to 78. And those library notes were deeper in the paper, so there were always a lot of ads around them. And I thought it was really kind of fun when I looked at some of these, and I grabbed one from each of the pages that went along with these, with names that you may remember, like Miller's Garage, or Nebel Electric, or the Donna, or Gamble's, or Stroh's Pharmacy and Country Kitchen, things that aren't around anymore. But that's another kind of fun part of visiting the online archive, because you can see all those ads and the traveling back sections and all that great content. One of the things that I learned, one more thing before we get into the schools, but one of the things that I learned from Laura at the library was there was a gentleman named Fred Crandall who was an architect, grew up in Sturgeon Bay, practiced in Sturgeon Bay. He lived from 1859 until 1936, and Fred was really behind and the designer of so many iconic buildings in the county, including a lot of the schools that we're going to see tonight. But he did a lot of the buildings that were indirectly or directly connected with the Bookmobile, including the original library in Sturgeon Bay. He did buildings like Cherry Lanes, the Masonic Temple, a number of really beautiful homes that are in Sturgeon Bay. He did the Institute Saloon. He was the architect. There was an architect behind the Institute Saloon. And he also did Horseshoe Bay Farms, which is where the Bookmobile resides these days. So Fred's really impressive. At some point, I'm going to try to do a little bit more looking into him, because I had no idea he existed. But then again, I had no idea that a lot of the schools that we're going to look at tonight existed either. So, another statement for rural schools children, the Bookmobile was a lifeline to worlds beyond their reach. It really did bring learning, and it brought more than the books. It brought joy to these students, and really was that lifeline. So we're going to start with Southern Door. When Giz and I talked that very first day, he gave me a number of schools in Southern Door, and I thought, well, this can't be right. How could there be that many schools? The only ones that I knew were the ones that were off 57 when we used to drive to Green Bay. Little did I know that there were all of these schools in Southern Door. But Southern Door, Giz told me the other day too, he said somebody asked him, is Sturgeon Bay part of Door County? And I think we tend to forget about all of this land that is south of Sturgeon Bay. There's over 200 square miles make up Southern Door. And in the old days, when students had to walk to school, uphill both ways, I'm told, but they had to walk to school, so the schools had to be within a reasonable walking distance. And so you can kind of see that in Southern Door, it's distributed pretty evenly, and a couple of places where there were holes, there might have been earlier schools that just weren't part of this. But it's really impressive how many different schools, and each one of these, of course, had different buildings, and it had different teachers, and there was a lot going on down there. And so at the beginning of the Bookmobile's run in the 50s, early 50s, these schools were all in place, and these are all schools that the Bookmobile visited. I told you about the illustration that artificial intelligence put together. This is the Bookmobile, or a fairly good facsimile. There's some details that aren't exactly right, but here's the Bookmobile in front of Morningstar School, and you can just about imagine. I love the fact that it's kind of like a children's book illustration, but you can just about imagine there probably would be more kids coming up to it, but it gives hopefully gives a good indication of what it looked like. I'm assuming a lot of you probably did participate in it, and maybe that's why you're here. So hopefully it's fairly true to what it looked like. Looks like what I remember from Sevastopol. So let's start way on the south end in the town of Union. This is one of the southernmost schools in the county. It's Pleasant Ridge School. Dates back to 1900. It's a single room school, red brick, fairly basic structure. Closed approximately 1964, and Nyla, I apologize if I get some dates wrong. I apologize to everybody if I get some dates wrong. Some of them also, when I went online, different sources had different dates. So, and some of them were quite a swing. So I'm trying to be as accurate as I can here. But it closed around 1964. The building is still in existence today. This is a photo I took last year. It is in good shape, but it's not really very apparent what it's being used for now. But that is one of the Union schools. Also in Union was Rocky Glen School. Rocky Glen is was a wooden frame building with clapboard siding, fairly good sized school. This one also closed in the early 60s. The building was sold at that point. Typically what would happen is either the community or the town or the school district would sell the schools when they weren't needed anymore. And so Southern Door had a big sale on the schools. Sometimes they would sell the school with the land. Sometimes they would just sell the building itself, and so generally it was torn down at that point. So when this one was sold in 1964, the ad said that it does not include the land or the fence. Didn't come along with it. So it was ultimately torn down. Today there is a newer house that's built actually on the foundation from the school. So you can still, if you drive down there, it was on County Y, you can still see where it was. This one might be a little bit more familiar to people because if you drove to Green Bay like we did, in Namur on the corner, you would see off to the right, you would see Fairland School. And Fairland still is standing, but this is the southernmost Fred Crandall design of schools. And what I thought was interesting with this one is it's the only school in the county that was built with this open porch. All the other ones, if they had an entryway, all the other ones were enclosed, but this one had this porch. And you'll see that there were two entrances. And a lot of the schools had these two entrances because there was a boys' entrance and there was a girls' entrance. And I visited Wanneger School a couple weeks ago, and there was a former teacher that was working in there, and I was asking her about why there were the two, and she didn't have a great answer, but she did say that she thought it was because the boys thought the girls had cooties, and so they had to go into a different door. So the building still stands. It's had a big garage door punched into it. But a lot of the rest of it, you can tell. This is an elevation from Fred Crandall's design, and you can see the porch and the symmetry of this building. One of the other things that I thought was interesting with this as I was researching it was Namur actually was renamed at one point to Fairland. So the school and the town actually had the same name for a number of years. But then in 1962, Namur changed back to Namur. So at that point then they didn't match anymore. But for many, many years it was Fairland School in the town of Fairland or the village of Fairland or whatever it was. If we go up the street a little bit more, now we're in Brussels. And the big Brussels school was the main school on School Road in Brussels, built in 1920. This is also a Crandall design. This had additional annexes added to it over the years. There was a gym annex to one side. There was a band and home ec annex to the other side. You can see in the center on 2024, the building was demolished. So the center portion that was the main school no longer stands, but the annexes are on both sides. I don't know if you can see this very well, but I thought one thing that was kind of interesting, and I just noticed it this morning, is I thought that this was such a symmetrical building until I looked a little closer and found out that the windows actually on the left-hand side of the building are smaller on the upper side, and they've got eyebrows on the lower side, and the other side doesn't. So not sure why that's the case, but it was just something that I happened to notice. If you're not familiar with where the Brussels School was, this was a great early aerial photo. You can see Old 57 up above. In the upper right-hand corner, that would have been Marchant's. So you can see the original school building where it is south of the highway, the gym annex, and the home economics and band building. This is that design, and you can see Fred did it from the beginning with the different windows on both sides. So not quite sure why, but I actually didn't notice it until this morning. I thought it was a perfectly symmetrical building up until this point. Some other Brussels Township schools, there's the Kohlberg School. This dates back to 1908, was closed in the early 60s along with many of the other Southern Door schools. Still stands, it's a residence today. And my particular favorite, which is Roosevelt School. Roosevelt School sits on Highway J, and it literally is out in the middle of nowhere. there is nothing around it. There's a couple of farms, there's a couple of houses, but you drive down the street, there's not a old bar on the corner. There's not even a corner with this one. It just is out in the middle of nowhere. But it's this really impressive red brick building built in 1908. It is built in the octagonal style, so you can see up above that it has an octagonal cupola. And it did fall into disrepair at some point, but now it's been restored. And this is a great shot of it, because if you try to get a picture of it from the street, there's a huge RV that's parked out in front of it, and you can't get it. So I was really glad to find this one online. But this is my personal favorite. There's no other school in the county that looks like it, and I just think it's really, architecturally, it's very interesting. Morning Star, we're going to jump to Nassau now. Now we're just south of Sturgeon Bay. We're going to work south in Nassau. Morning Star sits on County C. There's a lot of schools on County C, and if you do want to do sort of a tour of where they either are or used to be, County C is a great way to start at the airport and work your way down to Brussels and even south of there. Morning Star was closed in 1972. It was torn down at some point, and it's currently the site's the Nassau Town Hall and fire station. But one piece of it was kept. The most iconic piece of it was kept. That was the bell tower, and it is used as a garden structure now, which I think is a great repurposing, and such a great reuse of such an iconic piece for them. Also in Nassau is Wilson School. You might remember this on County S on the way to Algoma. This is an older school built in 1896. It was closed later on with the consolidation. It was demolished in 2001, and currently it's the site of a newer building, metal building that's on that site. There's also Haynesville School. Haynesville School is in Haynesville and sits close to the Haynesville Lutheran Church. You can see in an older picture of it in the upper right, you'll notice that almost all of these schools have large windows in them. And generally on one side or two sides, they would have these windows. And if you think about it, Giz did a great article in the Pulse, I think a few years ago, about why they had these windows. They needed the windows for the light. The students had to be able to see in. And they maybe didn't have electricity in the beginning, or the bulbs just weren't very good. So they needed those windows in order to study. And the interesting thing that I thought here was, if you look at the original picture, there were 4 windows on the side. At some point, they punched 2 more in, so it must have been too dark in the school, and they added a couple more windows. But Haynesville does still stand. It didn't look too great in the lower left, but today, this picture from last year, the building is in nice shape. I think it's used as a residence or some type of it has some type of use today. Wanneger School also used to be on County C. Was built in 1882. This is an old one. But in 2009, it was gifted to the Southern Door School District. Judy Jesse was very involved in this project, by the way. They moved the school, and it sits in front of Southern Door Elementary right now in beautiful shape. It's been restored. This is a great place to understand why there were those big windows, because when you go in, all the desks are in there. It's all propped out as if it were in the early 1900s, late 1800s. I was just there a couple weeks ago, and it really is an impressive structure. So we're very fortunate that this one and one other one that we're going to see in a minute have been restored and are available for us to take a look at. This was the moving process in 2009 when they moved it from C over to DK, or Old Highway 57. Pleasant View was also on C in Nassau. Pleasant View, you can see the original in the upper right. This one really did fall into disrepair. The bell tower is gone. You can see it was, after it was closed in '64, it really just doesn't look very good. But fortunately, it was saved. It was picked up. It was put on a new foundation, and you can see it today in the lower left. Interesting thing here is that when it was built and on its original foundation, it was a north-south building. But when they moved it, they turned it east-west. So it actually faces a different direction now than originally. Lincoln School, another one. If you drive to Green Bay, even today, you're familiar with this one. This one dates back to 1890, was added onto in the 30s, closed around 76. It's currently a residence, but if you remember back, it had that not very attractive mobile home that sat out next to it for a number of years. Fortunately, today, it's been restored and looks very much like it originally did, and you can still see it. It's just north of Renard's on 57. Stoke School, a little farther up. This is Nassawapi, a little farther up on 4257. This school sat across from, it's currently a big insurance building and dance hall, I think, but it sat on the corner of Highway 4257 and County O. From what I'm told, the Stokes students actually went to Sturgeon Bay High School when they left this school. Unfortunately, it was closed in the 60s. It's been torn down, and there's a mobile home on the site. You may recognize this, recognize how it looks today, but unfortunately, it's no longer with us. Also in Nassawapi is the Thrift School. The Thrift School is down the road from the old Toggy Tavern. It's on Toggy Road, and this one dates back to 1901, was closed around 1961. It was sold in '64 for $152. That's the building and the land. But what wasn't included, the outside toilets and the woodshed were not included in this, and those were sold separately. I don't know how much they got for them, but they sold those separately. You can see it's in good shape today. I think it's used as a residence, so it's still with us, fortunately. Gardner School. We're going to move on to the town of Gardner now. Gardner sits also on Highway C. It was built in 1915. I don't have proof, but I also believe that it's a Waniger school. Or I'm sorry, it's a Fred Crandall school, because it's very, very similar to Bailey's Harbor and to Liberty Grove School or Liberty School. It's in the Craftsman style. This was closed in 1972, and last year when I started this project, I was talking to someone that I knew, who I knew went to a Southern Door school, and he ended up going to Morningstar. But I told him what I was doing, and he said, you know, they just tore down Gardner School. And that afternoon I got in the car and I drove down, and it wasn't all gone yet. It was pretty close to it. There actually was a bulldozer on the other side of this as this was happening. But you can see that old Gardner was finally torn down. I love the sink out in front, and you think about how many kids washed their hands in that sink probably before they went out to the Bookmobile to get their books. So this was a stucco building on wood frame, and you can kind of see that it wasn't in very good shape at the time that it was torn down. So it may have been beyond saving, unfortunately. Fortunately, though, a little farther down C in Gardner, this was Gardner School number 2, and that's Four Corners School, small red brick school. It is currently, it still looks very much like it did. It also closed in early 70s, built in 1934, so one of the newer ones, but it is the Gardner Town Hall today. So it looks very much like it did back when it was a school. This one doesn't look as much like it did when it was a school. Stevenson Pier School, which is on C and Stevenson Pier Road. It, later after it was closed, it became a laundromat. And it's currently part of the Citco complex. And you can kind of see some of the lines are still in there, but it's been added onto and not necessarily restored to its former glory. This Sugar Creek was a mystery school because I can't find where it actually was located. And Judy didn't necessarily have the information either. I do have the picture of it when it was a school, and I have a picture of it before it was torn down. I believe it was close. There's a Sugar Creek, there's a park, a Gardner Park, that is part of Sugar Creek, and I think that that's where it was. But if anybody knows at some point, please, I would love to know after the presentation. Oh, and the other thing too is, if you attended any of these schools, if you'd raise your hand, it would be great to see if where people went. I'm sorry I went past those other ones before saying that, in case you did go to one of those schools, but there's plenty more. This is the Tornado School. This is another one you might be familiar with because it sits off of 57, sits back. It used to be much more visible. I remember as a kid you could see it better. It's pretty much grown up around it today, but this sits near Tornado Memorial Park. And this was built in 1910. It's a stone-faced cement block structure, a little bit larger, a very gray building. It's not as cheerful as some of the red brick ones. But I was told too, you can see there is a basement to this one. Apparently it used to be prone to flooding. And the bathrooms were in the basement, and the kids had to walk across a plank when they wanted to go to the restroom because the basement was quite often flooded in the Tornado School. Today it's a residence, looks great when you go close to it. So this was a joint Brussels and Gardner School District school, according to what I saw. We move over to 42 now, and the Forestville Victory School. This is one of the bigger schools in Southern Door. You can see that it also, in more of its original form, it had the two doors, presumably the boy and girl door. Later on, it had a not very elegant tacked-on center door put on it. Apparently, they could go together at that point in it. This was built in 1920. Closed in 1972 and ultimately was demolished, probably too big for reuse, but it is the site of the fire department now. This sat on Main Street in Forestville, corner of Main and 42. So, but it was in use for many, many years. This one has design-wise, it's Cream City brick, and it has its bell tower off to the one side. Otherwise, the facade of it is perfectly symmetrical, but they decided to put the bell tower to the one side, just as something, I guess, a little bit different. Up the road, town of Forestville number 2 is Maplewood School. This one, built in 1911. This is also a Fred Crandall design. It was closed in 72 and ultimately demolished in the early 2000s. It is the site of the Forestville Town Park and Hall today. But you can see this was the rendering, the front rendering or elevation that Crandall did for the school. Very symmetrical, fairly simple, with minimal ornamentation on it, but really good-looking school, I think, personally. The East Maplewood School, guess what? It was east of Maplewood, and still is. It's on Maplewood Road on a corner. Kind of an interesting location. Built in 1880, it was added on to at one point. It actually has like a right-angled addition towards the rear of the school. This was closed, my source said 1972. It currently isn't in use. I took this picture last year, and you can see it's not really maintained right now, but it looks like it has a good roof on it, so hopefully at some point it'll find another life. There also is St. Peter's Lutheran School. This was one of the parochial schools. Built in 1912, the school went until 1960. They sold the residence, or they sold it a little bit later, and currently it's a residence. Doesn't have its bell tower anymore, but you can still really see what its original purpose was. This is Giz's favorite school, according to what he told me, and that's the Carnett School. It's in the town of Forestville, number 4. As originally built, it was a symmetrical Cream City brick building. Later, they added on the addition. You can see there's a lot of windows in this one, so it presumably was very bright for the classrooms. But it is still very attractive building, I think being used as a residence. Found it last year. It's on Carnett Road in what's left of Carnett. There also is Salona School. This one was on County U. County U is another one that there were a number of schools on. This was built back in 1895, was also known as the Cheeseville School. And it was closed in the 40s, but the location was still used for a bookmobile stop. So that's why I added it here. The building sold for $266 in 1961, and it was torn down. This is the site there that's there now. There is a sign. I think there's a newer version of this sign, but it just it basically commemorates the fact that there once was a small community named Salona with a cheese factory and the school and other elements. This is our other restored school, and we're very fortunate to have this one as well. This is Vignes School. Vignes was originally on County 00. It now sits in Heritage Village in Sturgeon Bay. It's been beautifully restored. This is also a great one to see about the light. My wife and I were in here a few weeks ago, and it's very bright. It's been restored to look like the late 1890s or late 1800s. It has all the desks, it has the books, it has everything in it. It's a great experience if you haven't already done it. On the site where it originally sat in Vignes, the Claybanks Town Hall is there now. So they kept the property and repurposed it. And this is my mystery school, really my mystery school. I know where it was. This is Lakeview School, but there are no photos of it that I can find. And it went until 1964, right around 1964. This was also one of those schools that the school district sold, and in this case, it was just the building, not the land, but you got the furnace and you got the supply of coal that came along with it in the basement. It didn't sell the first time, but it did sell the next year for $26. That's the building and the coal and the furnace, and it sold to the same guy that bought Rocky Glen School a few years earlier. So if anybody has a picture of Lakeview, love to get that. And then, of course, consolidation. All of these schools ultimately ended up consolidating into the Southern Door School District. For a while, Brussels was used as the high school, but in 1962, when Southern Door High School was built, then I think Brussels became the middle school, and when the elementary school, which is this one, was put in place in 1973, that really was the end of the rural schools in Southern Door. You can see when this was built in '73, that was the photo when new. There aren't a lot of windows there. They didn't need them at that point. And it's not a very elegant looking building either, but apparently it does its job. But it was on the right or the left-hand side of the complex, and the high school was on the right. And through the years, through all the different additions, they've been bridged. So it's all one building at this point. The Bookmobile extended service to places not participating in the program, even where local libraries already existed. And I'm talking about Sturgeon Bay. Again, as I mentioned before, Sturgeon Bay was not part of the program, but there were a couple of town of Sturgeon Bay schools and a couple of parochial schools that did participate. Here's that Bookmobile at Corpus Christi, parked on the grass. So AI isn't perfect, but gives you a little bit of an idea. Silverdale School was one of those town of Sturgeon Bay schools. It was school number 5. This was also on County U and Silverdale Road. It was part of Sturgeon Bay School District, but it does sit within Southern Door, and I think ultimately was merged into Southern Door. This was closed in 1964. The building is still there. It's not very recognizable except for the outer shape, but it does still sit on County U, so it's visible. And then the other one on the other side of Sturgeon Bay was Evergreen School. Evergreen School is on Highway TT. It's just up the street now from Vignes, and this was a joint. From what I saw, was a joint school district between Sturgeon Bay and Sevastopol. Built in 1905, it's an older school, closed in 1957, and it's currently an artist studio.
I went to the Evergreen School.
Did you?
So did I.
Oh, good. Good, thank you. I should be watching for hands, especially as we get more northern in the county. I'll have to do a better job with that. Corpus Christi was another place that it stopped. Corpus Christi being built in '51 and expanded in '58. It was combined with the other Catholic schools in 2006, and it's now St. John Bosco School. But they utilized the Corpus Christi campus, and it's currently a 4K through 8th grade school. Down the street, the Lutherans they've got a school too. This is on Maple Street. That school opened in 1983. And it currently also offers preschool through 8th grade. So this is the St. Peter's Lutheran School. We didn't know if they actually stopped there. I couldn't find anything in the Advocate, but Giz did some research, and he's confirmed that yes, indeed, it did stop at St. Peter's once a month. And it was more than books. It was really opportunity that the Bookmobile delivered. And now we're moving north. We're moving to Central, and going to start in Central Door County. You can see this is how I've classified it. It may not be the best way to do it, but I'm looking at Sevastopol and Jacksonport and Egg Harbor as sort of that central swath of schools. Starting with Sevastopol, and this is what I remember. Of course, it sat the other way in the driveway, but it still looked very much like this. With the bookmobile pulling up in front of Sevastopol School and standing in line and waiting and getting our books. We had 2 great libraries within the school, but it still was great to go out and see the other selection, but also just to get out of class or whatever we were doing. I mean, of course, for all of you probably too, it was a break from our regular routine. Sevastopol's teams are called the Pioneers, and they're called that for a reason, and they deserve to be called that for a reason, because Sevastopol was the first consolidated school district, either in the state or north of Milwaukee, depends upon the source that you look at. But this was a huge experiment for the town of Sevastopol, because they had all like everybody else, they had the rural schools, but they made this decision in the early 20s that they were going to consolidate it all in one place and build this pretty momentous school in Little Institute. And one of the issues with that is, of course, when you start to centralize everything, now the kids have to walk a lot farther to school. So they had to have buses for Sevastopol, and you can see in this upper photo the early school buses lined up in front of the school. A little different from the bus that I rode 40 minutes both ways to Sevastopol every day that Clarence Bubolz was driving. That would have been a little different experience in those little ones. Sevastopol was built in 1924 as a consolidated school. When growing up, my mother went to Sturgeon Bay, and she referred to it as cesspool consolidated. But then she sent both of her sons there, so I don't know if that had any difference. But in 1964, the high school was built and added on. Interesting thing that I learned when that was being built is a lot of people were against that at that point. They thought that Sevastopol should be rolled into Sturgeon Bay or Gibraltar, that it should be split, and the northern kids should go to Gibraltar and the southern kids should go to Sturgeon Bay. But first, calmer heads prevailed, I guess, and the high school was added. And then in a couple years ago, this is a great rendering of the original school, the 1924 school. This is, I wanted to talk about this. You know, those windows that were so important in letting the light in, also, I'm sure, let the cold in. And in the spring and the fall, they probably let the sun in, and so they were very hot, because there was obviously no air conditioning in those days. So you can see on the left-hand side, with Sevastopol, they bricked those windows in. And I remember I went there when that was going on, and where there were 5 windows in the classroom, they bricked up 4 of them, and there was only 1 tall one, and later on, they bricked up part of that, and there was only the one window in each room, because the light was better, and they didn't need to have all those windows. Unfortunately, a couple years ago, Sevastopol fell victim to the wrecking ball as well. A new school was built behind it, and the original 1924 school came down. It's not as elegant looking from the road anymore, but I will say I've been in the new part of the school, and it is really impressive what they've done with that, with the new elementary school and the updates that they've made to the high school as well. Sevastopol people here, I didn't look any. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, we didn't have Sturgeon Bay in here, but that bookmobile didn't go there. Did you? Yeah. People that I know now can't believe that I went to the same building for all 13 years of school. They just don't. My wife and my son do not understand it. They're like, "How did you do that?" I didn't know any different. Couple other schools in the Sevastopol district. Cherry School seems to have belonged to Sevastopol at some point, maybe Sturgeon Bay. It was run independently as a special needs school for many years. It was closed in 1985, though, became a daycare, and that closed in 2014. And I took this picture yesterday, I think. It's kind of tatty looking these days, unfortunately. It doesn't look so great.
They had an addition.
Yes, like many of the schools. They built on the flat-roofed addition. Did it? Yeah, the addition like that is very common, especially in the Gibraltar school area. St. Peter and Paul, also an institute on Dunn Road, built in 1941, closed in 2008, somewhere around that, incorporated with St. John Bosco. This is, I remember St. Peter and Paul very clearly because when you graduated from there, you went on to Sevastopol, and I remember those students coming into our class. They were all very smart, so something right must have been going on in this building, because I just remember them as being some of the top students in our class. And then we moved to Jacksonport. Jacksonport had its own school district. There were 4 schools before everything rolled to Sevastopol. This is the school is on Highway 57, built in 1930. It was last used as a school in 1960 when it was consolidated with Sevastopol, and it's currently a residence and a music studio. I included the photo with the flag being raised because this actually appeared in the Milwaukee Journal. It was extremely cold. I don't know how cold it was, but that was the reason they put it in, and that's my late father, Jay Olson, raising the flag. So that was always a photo that we had in our family of the Jacksonport school. The other schools in Jacksonport, there's Fairview in West Jacksonport, or sometimes called Farview. And this was... There are answers both ways. Some people call it Fairview, some people call it Farview. So what's the right name? I'm going to refer to it as Fairview. It's on County T in West Jacksonport, built in 1907, was a school until about 1960, and it's been restored. It's a red schoolhouse now, and is currently a private residence. Groveland School on County A was another one of the Jacksonport schools, built in 1907. It went until the late 50s, early 1960. It's been rebuilt as a residence. You can see it doesn't look exactly like it was at the school. The windows are gone. I remember when they were still in that building. But it's now a residence. Looks a little bit different. Washington is the other one. It's also a residence. It looks very similar, though, as a residence to what Groveland looked like. Washington sat on Ehlers Road right off of County I on the way to Carlsville. And it was last used as a school in 1957. It was the first school in the Jacksonport system to close. And it's currently, as I said, a private residence. Groveland and Washington look very similar now and when they were first built. Fairly simple wood frame buildings with the clapboard siding and the big windows and the bell tower. The other Jacksonport school, Zion Lutheran School. Zion opened in 1975, originally in the church parish hall, I believe. Moved to this building around 1981. It closed as the school daycare in 2024. But it's a pretty impressive facility. Hopefully it'll find another life, another use down the road. And then, of course, we get to Egg Harbor. Right over here, I believe, the Egg Harbor School, which many people I saw considered the best-looking school in Door County. It was built out of the similar stone to the Catholic Church, built in 1913 and closed in 1972, consolidating with Gibraltar. It was demolished, according to sources, 1977, and it's the home of the fire station now. But unique-looking building, different than any other school in the county. Egg Harbor also had number 3. They had the Carlsville School. Carlsville School was built in 1919, and it became part of the Sevastopol School District in 1961 when the Egg Harbor School District rolled in with Gibraltar. It closed in 1965, and it's currently the Door Peninsula Winery. It's expanded beyond belief in size, but that front portion on 42 still looks very much like it did as a school. The other one, Egg Harbor number 4, was Sunny Point School. You went to Sunny Point? I know Glenn Hasenegger went there too, another one. Sunny Point was built in 1919. It's another one of the Fred Crandall designed schools, and it is sort of a prairie style, has a lot of ornamentation on it, more so than some of the other ones. It was closed around 1958 from what I've read because of some fire damage. It did sit for a long time unused and sort of falling apart. It was rebuilt, and unfortunately, in that tornado in August of 1998, it took a horrible hit. looking at it, you would think that it was a complete loss and that they just would have torn it down, but they didn't. They actually did rebuild it. Looks very different. It's got the sloping roofs, but they've restored some of the ornament pieces. The entryway is similar, so Sunny Point is still there, fortunately, just in a little bit different look. That's Sunny Point in the beginning and in how it looked. Again, symmetrical, stucco building. So we're going to move on. The Bookmobile connected those rural schools to the wider world, making knowledge and imagination a shared community resource, which it really did. If you think about all these schools that it went to, they didn't have big libraries. They couldn't. So the resources were somewhat limited. I'm sure they were good, very good for what they had, but the Bookmobile brought the outside world to them. And still does, actually. It's just a different model today. You'll see the Bookmobile around, and instead of it being a lending model like it was in the old days, now the kids go in, they enjoy it, but they get a book to take with them. They don't have to bring the book back. It's theirs to keep, which is really a wonderful program. Northern Door, you've got a few different towns here, ultimately consolidating into Gibraltar, but there's the Bookmobile in front of Ellison Bay School. That, I believe, is where Nyla went. So, starting with Bailey's Harbor, another Crandall design in that similar style to Gardner. Bailey's Harbor was built in 1917, and then in 55, I believe, there was an addition that was put onto the front. Like many of the other schools, it was modernized. Flat-roofed addition with some more classrooms. It really became very unrecognizable, and today it's still sort of unrecognizable from what it originally was. But if you drive around the back, you can still see that original school. After it was closed, it was used for different purposes. It was the library, I think it was town office space, and then Lauren and Annie Pyle rescued it and turned it into Orphan Annie's. There was some retail, ultimately a B&B, and today I think their daughter, Christy, runs it as the Bailey's Harbor Schoolhouse Inn. Christy's also written a nice little book about the history of the school that I would recommend you take a look at. This is that original design, and that's what's behind, or was behind, the flat-roofed addition. Of course, the bell tower and the entryway is gone, or was gone. Here's my other mystery school, because I can't find a picture of this school when it actually was, the exterior of it anyway, when it actually was in use. And this is the Pershing School, which was a joint school district between the town of Gibraltar and Bailey's Harbor. We do have a photo of inside of the Pershing School, but there are no outside pictures. And so you can kind of see in the current picture of it that it sort of has that outline of a school building. But here again, if anybody did anybody go to Pershing? I didn't look when. If anybody has a picture of Pershing when it was in use, I would love to be able to incorporate that. Fish Creek School. Fish Creek is another one of those schools, built in 1921. It is a Fred Crandall design, but it was added on to as well at one point, and so it was really pretty unrecognizable because of that. The school closed, consolidated with Gibraltar, and it was later replaced with the Gibraltar Community Building that's on that site today. This is the original elevation of the Fish Creek School. Pretty nice looking school. Again, the two doors, probably the boys and girls doors, very typical of the time. Maple Grove School is Town of Gibraltar School number 4. This sits on the corner of F and Maple Grove Road. I always knew it as BS Corners. It still is there. It was closed in '61 and annexed into Fish Creek. It's a private residence. You can sort of see that they've raised the roof on it to give a second story, but otherwise it still very much looks like the original school. Juddville School was Town of Gibraltar number 5 school on Highway 42 in Juddville. Dates back to 1910, closed in 1957. St. Paul Lutheran used it as a memorial center for a while, and currently it's a gallery. It looks very much, color scheme is a little different, but it looks very much like it did originally. So that's one I'm sure many of us drive by on a regular basis. Ephraim School is one of the newer ones, built in 48 or 49. This is on North Norway Street. Liberty Grove School merged into Ephraim in the early 60s. Currently, it is the Ephraim Municipal Building, but a little bit different look than the rest of them since it was built a little bit later. And then the Sister Bay School, which sat on the top of the hill in Sister Bay. I imagine that at one point when they were talking about building this school, that there probably was an argument in the community with those people that were below the hill and the people that were above the hill. Because if you were below the hill, you didn't want to have to walk up that hill and down that hill every day. If you lived above the hill, you didn't want to have to walk down it and come back up. Somehow the people on top of the hill won, and the school was built. You can see it in its original form over in the lower left. This one also had an addition that was added to it in, I think, 1960 or so. This one was last used as a school. This is another one of these where the dates are different. Nyla, I don't know if you have a date in mind that was closed, because I've seen 83, anywhere through 83 and 88 when it was closed and consolidated with Gibraltar. In the last few years, it was demolished, and now there's condominiums on the spot because it's an amazing view from that space. Liberty School, this is Liberty Grove School number 1. This is on 57 and German Road, also known at times as the Liberty Grove School or as the German School. This was built in 1915. This is another Fred Crandall design. It was closed in 1965, and it's currently a private residence. You can see, though, in the lower left, it's very similar to its original, just some window changes in it. The interesting thing with this one that I thought is it's got a really, really wide overhang on its bell tower, like much wider than any other one that I've seen. It also, I believe, is the inspiration for Charles Peterson's painting Fresh Snow, because it's very, very similar to the Liberty School. Liberty School is very similar also to Bailey's Harbor. And when you look at the Bailey's Harbor School, which was built right around the same time, and you overlay Liberty School, it's really, really similar. So I think it probably was a reuse or an update of one of the designs one way or the other because they are so similar. Appleport School was part of Liberty Grove. This was number 2. This is on the corner of ZZ and Old Stage. This one closed in the 60s, and it did fall into disrepair for a while, but it was restored in the early 2000s. Really beautiful. It was in the news last week because there was a big tree in front of it that fell during the storm, and so I saw it in a number of places where the school was in the background with that tree down. But this also, I believe, was inspiration for Charles Peterson for his painting Recess, because it looks very much like the original school. Wildwood School, we're getting there, folks. We're getting north now. This is Liberty Grove number 3, Old Stage Road in Sister Bay. This was built somewhere between 20 and 1923. Closed in 1965, and the students moved to Fish Creek. The building was sold in 72, torn down, and it's now the site of Liberty Grove Town Building. This is a stucco building, a little bit different. It's bigger, symmetrical like many of the others, and the bell still exists. It's at the Liberty Grove Historical Society Museum, and I understand that they ring it from time to time. So that piece of the school is still there, and that was Wildwood School. Ellison Bay School, Nyla School, corner of School Road and Garrett Bay Road. This was built in 24 to 25, somewhere around that time. This was one of 5 schools that was built in Door County right around 1924. So that was a really prolific time for those schools to be built. I've not seen this attributed to Crandall, but I'll show you in a second why I think it was also a Crandall designed school. It's similar to Wildwood and to Newport School, those northern Door County schools, in that it's a stucco structure, and the walls facing the road are blank. So I'm assuming, maybe you can tell me, Nyla, is that where the chalkboards were? Probably. We'll just go with that. Closed in 70, it was demolished, and it's now a park in Ellison Bay. But if you look at this one and you overlay Maplewood, it's almost the same design as Maplewood, although Maplewood was a red brick building. It's even the ornamentation on it is really, really similar to Maplewood. So there's another one where there probably was a repurpose. I'm frankly surprised that they didn't do more of this. You would think that there would be a standard plan and they would just build more of them. But you got to hand it to the communities. They had their own unique styles in many of these schools. Finally, in Northern Door, there's the Newport School. Newport School is on Europe Bay Road, was built in that time of 23-24, closed in 57, and the students then went to Ellison Bay because there was a declining enrollment. It's been Uncle Tom's Candy Store for many, many years. Most people are probably familiar with it. It looks like the Ellison Bay School, but that they cut part of it off. It's not that center entrance like some of the other ones, but it is a stucco school, and very familiar now as Uncle Tom's. All of these schools ultimately consolidated into Gibraltar. Gibraltar Secondary School or High School, the original one, built in 1918, Fred Crandall design. You can see it in the center on the right. The gymnasium then was added behind it with the curved roof in the mid-1930s. That original building was demolished in the early 50s, and the more modern school was built at that point. It was added, expansions in the 70s. The auditorium, Door County Auditorium, was added to the complex. And it is, I haven't been by it lately. I don't know if it's completely gone, but it's being demolished now to make way for a new school. The elementary school is also part of that complex, so everything, like Sevastopol, everything's in one place. Like Southern Door, everything is in one place at this point. This had to have the demolition photo. Sorry for those of you that went there. It's got to be painful, but it was being torn down, including the gymnasium is going to be gone. And in the end, this is what the school will look like. One large complex with all relatively new construction. So the Bookmobile bridged the miles both on land and on sea because the Bookmobile also went to Washington Island. The two schools on Washington Island, it visited there. They used to put it on the ferry. Today it would be a lot easier, and probably is if it goes there, because the ferries are open. They're bigger and they're open. But in these days it had to go on the Richter, and I'm sure there was only a certain way that it would fit on that boat. But they did take it there on a very regular basis. Here's the Bookmobile in front of the Detroit Harbor School and how it probably appeared. Washington Island had 4 schools originally, but in 1945 they were consolidated into 2 schools. And the 2 schools that were remaining, one of them was the Washington Harbor School. This was the high school. And this dates back to 1904. It was closed in 1964 when everything moved over to the Detroit Harbor campus, and it's currently the Art and Nature Center. This school has the distinction of being the last high school in the state to not have indoor plumbing. I don't know if you want to be known for that, but that's what it was known for. So over on the other side of the island, or the south side of the island, was Detroit Harbor School. This one was built in 1919. It's also a Crandall school. It looks, on first look, it looks like Brussels. It looks like some of the other ones. I thought what was interesting is in all of these photos, the color scheme keeps changing. Sometimes it's light on top and dark on the bottom, and sometimes it's dark on top and light on the bottom. They must have had a good painter, and they changed their mind a lot about it. The school was added onto. The high school was added in 1964. We'll see that in the next slide. And unfortunately, the school was demolished when the new school was built. This is Fred Crandall's design for Washington, or the Detroit Harbor School. You can see here that there was the flat-roofed addition added to it, like many of the others. But in this case, they put it on the side, I guess like Cherry School, instead of putting it in front like some of the others. So it's still, other than a kind of an awkward looking entryway in the old school, it still looked very much like it originally did. But all things come to an end, and in 1986 it was demolished. They did save the bell tower though, like they did with Morning Star. And you can see in the lower left, the new school is behind it, but that's approximately where the old school sat. That is the whole county. Man, we did it all the way from south to north. But, you know, in thinking about these schools, it really was a significant driver in the Door County education. The Bookmobile was around during the years that the education system really changed in the county from that rural model into the consolidated schools that we have today. Also, architecturally, what was interesting, and I'm kind of stepping back here. Sorry, this was it's in the wrong place. But in looking at it, you can sort of see the progression of architectural styles from the late 19th century of the Romanesque into neoclassical, into Prairie, into Sevastopol that they call collegiate Gothic, and into the modern style from the 20s and the 30s. Getting back to, though, the Bookmobile itself and its impact, it was around for 39 years in its first iteration, served the community to 57 schools. That's the count that I have of the ones that I went through. In 1959 was the peak year, and I think that this is absolutely staggering. In 1959, that Bookmobile drove 8,800 miles in that year and checked out almost 114,000 books to children and 10,600 books to adults. And the population around that time of all of Door County was about 20,600, which means if everybody took a book, that would be little over 6 books per person in the county. The Bookmobile touched a lot of people, as you can see in this. But getting back to that change, the model, the early 1950s, if you include Sturgeon Bay, there were more than 60 schools in Door County, which I can't believe. And almost half of those were in Southern Door. To today, where in the 1980s, where if you also include Sturgeon Bay, there are the five districts. So if I put all my maps together, this is the start. Those 57 schools in 19 different towns or townships or villages, to today, where we have the 5 school districts and the Bookmobile served those school districts as well, but not Sturgeon Bay. So this is the way it looked in the 1980s. So in those 30-some years, it was just a huge change between the models of education from the rural-based into the consolidated schools, again, that we have today. I was looking at where, I wanted to see where the enrollment is today and where the larger schools are out of all those consolidated schools. You can see that this is the 2024-2025 enrollments. Southern Door actually has the largest enrollment in their elementary school, but Sturgeon Bay in the middle and the high school has 1,013 students. Southern Door is not far behind, and then we drop down to Sevastopol, Gibraltar, and 62 students on Washington Island, for a total of almost 3,200 students in the county that are enrolled right now. What's impressive, though, and I like to think that the Bookmobile had a little to do with this, is that our schools, our county schools, are rated very, very highly. They all fall within the top 40% in the state, and 2 of them are in the top 10% of the state, according to U.S. News and World Report on the top high schools in Wisconsin. Now, everybody does this different, and you could look at any number of studies, and it probably would be different. This is the one that I liked, and this is the one that I'm quoting. So, out of 514 schools, Gibraltar ranks 25th, and Sevastopol ranks 38th. Which I think is pretty impressive. We can be very proud of that as a county. Sturgeon Bay and Southern Door are also up there, 149th Sturgeon Bay School District, and Southern Door ranked 195th. For some reason, Washington Island wasn't ranked. Maybe there aren't enough students there. But this is really, I think this is an impressive achievement, and I like to think that the Bookmobile had something to do with that in starting that excellence in education all those years ago, leading to where we are today. So, long before the internet, and this is long before the internet, the Bookmobile was our link to endless discovery. It really was. It brought education, it brought joy, it brought learning to all these students, and it really is an invaluable link to our past. With that, I thank you. I got through it. Oh my gosh. Thank you. And I didn't even take the full hour and a half. That's amazing. I'm sorry.